Greetings, travelers, and welcome to the Fairy Tavern. My name is Matthew.
And I'm Isaac, and today we are covering Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. A little bit of background before we start. Joseph Conrad was born Joseph Theodore Conrad Korzeniowski in December 3rd, 1857 in Poland. He is one of the most famous and most renowned English novelists, and short story writers. His works include Lord Jim, Nostromo, and The Secret Sharer, as well as others. Heart of Darkness is his most famous one. In the late 1890s, when Heart of Darkness was written, the world was turbulent with big political, technological, and cultural shifts. Europe was at the height of imperialism. The scramble for Africa during the 1880s and 1910s had divided nearly the entire African continent among European powers. The Congo Free State was at its most brutal phase in the 1890s. International reports of atrocities were just starting to leak out: forced labor, mutilations, mass death. Conrad's novels will resonate all these reports. Elsewhere in Britain, there was fighting. Britain was fighting the Second Boer War at the time in South Africa, another colonial conflict exposing the cost of the empire, just of empire. In the late 19th century, here was the highest point of the Industrial Revolution, making imperialism even more logistically possible. New weapons like the Maxim gun, which is like a Gatling gun, like a machine gun, gave Europeans overwhelming power in colonial wars. Technology wasn't progress for all, per se, but it just kind of enabled domination for the countries that had a lot of the technology. In the U.S., the Spanish-American War had just ended, marking America's emergence as an imperial power. This is where they really came out and were like, hey, we're part of the big dogs. In China, the Boxer Rebellion was just beginning, which is another anti-colonial uprising against Western exploitation, and Europe itself was just unstable. The great powers were competing for dominance, and this was all culminating, setting the stage for World War I. So, when Conrad was writing Heart of Darkness, imperialism was not a vague backdrop. It was the global system, shaping wars, economics, and cultures everywhere. Britain stood as the great empire, claiming to bring civilization to the barbarians, to bring order to chaos. And this is where I think it would be important for you, the listener, to imagine yourself as the ordinary British citizen of that time, oblivious to the horror going on and, where colonialism is happening, blissfully ignorant of the immense heart of darkness lying just up the River Thames, and ignorant, too, of the heart of darkness that's within yourself and the people around you. But then, Charles Marlowe, our main character, as you sit with him on a ship at sunset, begins to tell you a story that will irrevocably change the way you see the world. And so now we're going to get into the story. So just put yourself in that position as, the blissfully ignorant British citizen sitting on the ship with Charles Marlowe.
All right. Thank you, Isaac. Let's get into it. I will retell the story. I'm not going to read the story verbatim, but this is my retelling of the story. The sun sank towards the horizon as the Nelly pulled into anchor. As her captain was attending to the ship, Marlowe looked out upon the River Thames. A snaking waterway, with its mouth widening as it approached the sea, as if to embrace the incoming ships. Although the beauty of the scene charmed him, a feeling of uneasiness stirred within him as he watched the sun turn red, as if mortally wounded by some invisible attacker. The darkened clouds sprawled out over the heavens, fleeing the scene of the crime. Marlowe, a seaman himself, was no stranger to the ocean. Ever since his childhood, he earnestly desired to explore the unknown. His imagination was inflamed as he thought of the history of the great men who must have traveled through the same passage. Knights, adventurers, ancient conquerors. However, the scene of the snaking river, with its head in the sea, also reminded him of one of his old adventures. As he pondered these thoughts, the shadow of night began to lay heavy over the coastal town of Gravesend. Marlowe sat cross-legged against a shipmast across from his two fellow travelers. An expression of almost religious solemnity came over him as he prepared to recount the old tale to his companions. Yes, he had commanded a steamship once, down a mighty river, into the heart of a continent, through jungles on the edge of the unknown. However, getting there in the first place took a lot of doing. In the end, his kind aunt helped him get a contract with a French trading company as a steamship captain. He still remembered his trip to the bustling city where the company offices were. Although he was excited to finally take this job, there was something not quite right about the whole affair. He heard lots of talk about the high-minded ideals of the company and betterment to society, yet there was an eerie sense of a grim reality concealed behind the bright face of progress, like bones within an ornate sepulchre. He could not forget the two women he encountered at the front room, dressed in black, as if guarding the door to darkness. His meeting with the administrator flew by like a whirlwind. The next thing he knew, he was signing documents. It was not long after that he would depart in a French steamship filled with a cohort of soldiers, his fellow passengers. As they sailed closer to their destination in the African Congo, Marlowe could not shake the sense of a growing unreality. What he encountered as he moved south did not seem real. The places were strange, and the people acted even more strangely. French soldiers moving here and there to do God knows what. Once they passed a French warship firing upon so-called enemies on the coast. Meanwhile, the brooding presence of the jungle and the solemn voice of the surf seemed to frown in silent disapproval. The place itself seemed to be at war with these foreign intruders. Treacherous shoals and snags dotted the inlets, and to make matters worse, there was the frequent presence of sickness and fever. At last, after 30 days, their vessel anchored at the mouth of the great river of the Congo. From there, Marlowe received passage from a little steamboat down the river 30 miles to reach the outer station, where he was headed. Marlowe got on nicely with the captain. Both being seamen, they seemed to understand each other. However, the captain warned about the dangers ahead. He said that just the other day, one of the passengers had hanged himself for some unknown reason. His suggestion? It was something about this place that had a strange effect on people. After being dropped off, Marlowe climbed up a hill to get to the station. On his way, Marlowe saw many queer things: abandoned machinery left to rot, random pits in the ground. There was a sound of what seemed like explosive up on the cliff. Maybe they were making a railroad. However, as Marlowe shaded himself among the trees, he saw the most disquieting sight yet. He saw native black Africans who had run away from their work, emaciated and dying. He gave one of them a biscuit that he had. However, nothing he could give them could really stop these starving men from dying. They seemed almost like already dead, ghosts haunting the forest. The station was just up the hill. As Marlowe approached, he was met by the company's chief accountant. Well-groomed and dressed in fine clothes, this man was a strange sight. The accountant spoke of a man named Mr. Kurtz. This Kurtz was said to be in charge of the most important trading post, deep into the heart of Ivory Country, and his station produced more ivory for trade than all others combined. He is a remarkable person, the accountant said, with a sense of awe in his countenance. Marlowe would continue to ponder these things in his heart as he left the next day for a hike down to the central station. The trek seemed impossibly long, up hills, through ravines. Meanwhile, the sun beat down on him and the men with him with relentless fury. It was on the 15th day walking that the river finally came into view, and not long after the central station. As Marlowe approached the station, he was greeted immediately by a white man with a black mustache. After the man learned who Marlowe was, his cheerful face turned to a distressful repose. With great reluctance, the mustached man told him that the steam-powered vessel Marlowe was supposed to pilot down the river was down the river, that is, down at the bottom of the river, sunk. Apparently, they had decided to set off on journey 2 days before. Being under the care of some amateur skipper, the ship promptly sank. Now Marlowe, in charge of the sunken ship, was left to pick up the pieces of their mistake. That is, he had to pick up the pieces of the ship, fishing them out of the slimy river bottom. "You have 3 months to get this ship ready to sail," is what the station manager had afterwards told him with a blank expression. The manager was a curious man. He looked normal, too normal. Marlowe wondered what made this man, who seemed in every way to be average, to have this high position of company leadership. The people neither loved nor feared him, but he had a knack for getting people to do things by making them feel uneasy. Although Marlowe wanted to make a fuss about the whole situation, somehow, as if caught under this spell of uneasiness, he left the manager without protest and started work immediately on retrieving the ship. The days crept on as Marlowe steadily retrieved and began patching the ship back together. One night, Marlowe, having dozed off on the deck of the ship, overheard a conversation between 2 men walking by the river. One of them was the station manager, and the other, oh yes, it was the manager's wearisome uncle here in town, to everyone's chagrin. They were talking about Mr. Kurtz. Mr. Kurtz had been sick. Moreover, they were talking about the so-called beacon of light and visionary as if he was an obstacle in their way to be gotten rid of. Marlowe watched them make some kind of handshake out of the corner of his eye. In this moment, he felt a great feeling of dread, as if the darkness of this evil place was being unveiled. There was something savage and primeval about this land, as if it brought out a debased malignancy in human nature that lay long dormant and unshackled from modern society. Marlowe, being spooked by their sinister gesture, immediately jumped to his feet. The 2 men below, startled, both swore aloud, but then turned back towards the village, pretending as if they did not see him. Soon after, the ship was finally ready, and they made off down the river towards the inner station with Marlowe as captain. The manager was on board, along with a handful of white pilgrims from the village. However, the crew was made up of Africans. These men were locals. Marlowe had heard that they were cannibals. However, Marlowe got on with them good enough. However, if food became scarce, that could be an issue. They continued down the river in the steamer at a steady pace. Directing this ship was a dreadful affair. Obstacles everywhere. They had to maneuver around hidden rocks, sandbanks, shallows at every turn. To make matters worse, the jungle trees stretched out their foliage over the river as if to hide the way forward, and their gnarly roots splayed out underneath in order to trip them. Their journey went on mostly without issue, although there was the occasional issue of leaky steam pipes. One day, they came upon a run-down hut made of reeds with a tattered flag on a pole. They stopped and made anchor in order to explore the place, but found it abandoned. However, they found a stack of wood outside with an ominous warning. The warning said, "Wood for you. Hurry up. Approach cautiously." Marlowe found in this little shack an interesting-looking book which had strange writing on it, which seemed to him to be some kind of code. Marlowe quickly slipped the book in his pocket before they set off again with the extra fuel for the fire now on board. They continued down the twisting waterway, avoiding all the dangers and traps the river could throw at them. The sun was sinking fast on the evening of the second day, as they were just 8 miles now from the inner station where they would find this remarkable Mr. Kurtz. Marlowe wanted to go on, but the manager suggested they stop and rest that evening. According to him, the last stretch of their journey would be the most dangerous. Marlowe did not sleep much that night. The mangled wall of trees seemed to watch over him as he slept. By 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, they were rearing to set off again. However, as they were pulling in the anchor, they heard a shrieking cry pierce the thick canopy of fog. The pilgrims were startled, as if under attack. However, the cannibalistic crew reacted with grumbling stomachs, as if the deathly scream was the sound of food. However, They could move no more than an inch until the foggy veil around them had lifted, which would happen about 2 hours later. As they trudged on down, they encountered a grassy islet on their way that split the river into two. Marlowe directed their helmsman to steer them to the right, considering it to be the safest path. However, they had to pass dangerously close to the river bank. They were constantly dodging sticks and tree limbs poking out into their way, until all of a sudden there was a blur of sticks that shot out from the angry trees. No, it was not the trees, as Marlowe soon realized. They were arrows. They were under attack. The pilgrims, in a rush, pulled out their rifles and started firing wildly into the trees. The smoke of their rifles obstructed Marlowe's view of the assailants. The attack eventually died out. However, Marlowe noticed that his helmsman had been killed by a spear through the ribs. Marlowe, having grown quite fond of his helmsman, decided to dump the body overboard so that the cannibals could not have their way with them. Running away, they quickly jetted off from that place, hoping to avoid any second wave of attack. However, a suspicion began to rise that perhaps the same attackers who had assailed them had also gotten to Mr. Kurtz. Soon they would find out. It was not long before they would arrive at the inner station. They were greeted by a young man at the shore. No, it was not Mr. Kurtz. The man was strangely cheerful. His clothes had been patched up with multicolored pieces of cloth that made him look like a clown. He talked for a long time with Marlowe. Marlowe found out that he was a wanderer, originally from Russia, but had ran away from school to serve in English ships, having a thirst for adventure. Marlowe learned that the book he had found earlier belonged to the same man, and the strange markings on the pages were notes that he had written in Russian. Marlowe could not help but wonder at the things the man told him about Mr. Kurtz. Evidently, Mr. Kurtz's success was due to the fact that he had made himself like a deity to the native tribes around him. At his word, the great Kurtz could marshal men to follow him on savage raids on surrounding villages in order to steal the ivory. The Russian told Marlowe that Mr. Kurtz had even threatened to kill him at one point. However, even with all of this, the man seemed apologetic of Mr. Kurtz's unorthodox methods. He seemed to adore him as if he occupied all his emotions. Then suddenly, as they were speaking, a group of men marched out of the corner bearing a stretcher. A large group of dark shapes with spears at the ready could be seen in the distance. The man on the stretcher was none other than Mr. Kurtz. His body was long and emaciated. He looked as if he was carved out of ivory. He raised up his bony arm commandingly and said something that Marlowe could not quite make out, then fell back into the stretcher. He was being carried by the pilgrims with the manager behind. They took Mr. Kurtz back to one of the cabins. The manager was not happy and seemed to be more concerned about what Mr. Kurtz's unsound methods had done to the company. Marlowe retorted by saying that Mr. Kurtz is a remarkable man, but the manager corrected him, saying that he was a remarkable man, as if he was already dead. The plan was to load up all the station's ivory and the sickly Mr. Kurtz onto their ship and leave in the morning. Meanwhile, the Russian, fearing the wrath and hostility of the manager, decided to slip away from the others to continue his life wandering. He said a final goodbye to Marlowe and slipped out of sight. Somehow, Marlowe had promised him as a favor, as one seaman to another, he would preserve Kurtz's reputation in Europe. However, he learned from the man that it was actually Kurtz who had been behind the earlier attack on the steamer. Mr. Kurtz, who had known that they were coming, did not want to be taken away from his important mission. Later that night, as the manager, the pilgrims, and the crew all slept soundly, Marlowe awoke to find an empty bed. Mr. Kurtz was gone. Marlowe discerned a path in the tall grass where Mr. Kurtz had wandered off. Meanwhile, the steady beat of drums echoed from the hill, where the natives were having some kind of ominous ritual with a great bonfire. As Marlowe followed the path up the hill and almost to the fire, he came across Mr. Kurtz crawling towards the dim light. That encounter felt like a nightmare. Mr. Kurtz, though dying, was longing to go back to the natives, back to his godhood. No, he could not turn back now. "I had such glorious plans," exclaimed Kurtz. But Marlowe knew that this was madness. In that moment, Marlowe both pitied and feared this shadow of a man. On the one hand, the man was sickly and as good as dead, but on the other hand, all the great Kurtz had to do was cry out, and he could have men with spears strike him down in a mere breath. After a long period of deliberation, Marlowe carried Kurtz back down the hill without protest. When they left in the steamer the next day, it seemed to Marlowe like that encounter had all been a dream. As they were preparing to leave, a group of natives watched from a distance with fearful awe of the angry river demon, that is, the steamboat. Their leader, a proud woman adorned with necklaces and bracelets, led the procession. She stretched out her hands in longing reverence as the ship pulled out carrying Mr. Kurtz. Their glorious beacon of light and progress was withdrawing from them. As they journeyed back up the river, the great waterway took them up into its current, as if it wanted them to be gone from this place as soon as possible. It would be many times during their journey that Marlowe would notice Mr. Kurtz, who had been laid up in the pilot house, staring out into the jungle with a grim expression of longing and despair. No, his station, his ivory, his jungle, his great plans, all were slipping away from him as his own life was slipping away. One night, when the ship had stopped for repairs, Marlowe found him muttering to himself alone, saying, "I am lying here in the dark, waiting for death." Under the dim candlelight, Marlowe saw a sudden change in the man's expression. He wished he could forget what he saw. It was like a veil had been torn, and all of the man's life tore through that face like a floodgate. He saw all of his lofty dreams, his ruthless desire for power, and his hopeless despair, all at one time. The horror! The horror! Those were the last words that would come out of his mouth as he sank down lifeless, finally defeated by this evil place. Mr. Kurtz was dead. But Marlowe would never forget that encounter, and he could never forget that voice as long as he lived. Even after he returned safely to Europe, the voice of Mr. Kurtz would still be there whispering in the back room of his mind. He saw him speaking, with that bony arm outstretched and his mouth open, as if to devour all the world. The voice lived on. Marlowe pondered these things as he stood in front of a large wooden door down a quiet alley at dusk. It had now been more than a year since that tragic death, but Marlowe still remembered it like it was yesterday. As the door before him opened, he was greeted by a fair lady dressed in black and led into a great room with a roaring fireplace. As they sat down, Marlowe laid a package on the table. He was a remarkable man, Marlowe said solemnly. The woman agreed. I knew him best, she started. As the exchange continued, the two felt a certain kinship, as if they were both partakers in some profound spiritual experience. We shall always remember him, Marlowe said, after a long period of silence. However, the woman cried, as if in protest. I cannot believe. Not yet. I cannot believe that I shall never see him again. That no one will see him again. Never, never, Never. In that moment, she stretched out her arms in front of her solemnly as she gazed out into the distance. The ghostly image of that mourning woman, Marlowe would also never forget. But he also made sure that the world would never forget about Mr. Kurtz. The package which he had given to that fair lady was a bundle of writings penned by that man, that voice, and entrusted to him for safekeeping before his death. In it, his dreams, his intentions, his lofty words endured. However, whatever may be understood about the man from his writings, there were dimensions to Mr. Kurtz that only he could know, that could only be known from the experience of the man, experiences that cast all of his words into a different light. A shadow lurked behind every word that flowed from that snaking river, that unreal place that lingered forever in his memory. Suddenly, Marlowe broke from his trance-like state, as if he had just come back to himself. He was still sitting cross-legged, leaning against the mast before his fellow passengers and companions, who had been hanging on to every word of his tale. As he looked out onto the River Thames again, dumping into the sea, the blackened, overcast sky seemed to look back at him, as if a great shadow in the distance greeted him, calling him back to the heart of a great darkness.
Good story.
Yeah, a heavy story.
Yeah, it is. I like one part at the very end of the book where he's with Mr. Kurtz's, in the book it says the intended, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right at the end of the book when Marlowe is with Mr. Kurtz's intended, she, asks what his last words were, Mr. Kurtz's, and, Marlowe thinks about what it actually was, the horror were Mr. Kurtz's last words right before he died, and he thought, oh man, I can't tell her this. It would be too unfathomably unfair to tell her this. Too wrong. And so all he says is his last words were your name, and she's like, I knew it. He needed me and all that stuff. And it's just interesting. Very interesting. He spared her, I guess, the truth, but also, again, the truth sets you free. So, yeah.
I think that meeting with the woman at the end might be the most, powerful moment. But I really enjoyed the book. I really didn't like it at first. I tend to like uplifting, happy stories. And so like a book like this, Heart of Darkness, did not have as much appeal to me. But as I continued to read through, I found I liked the book a lot more. And there was a lot of just really good stuff in the book.
There's so much to take from it. I mean, yeah, I was telling my fiance about Heart of Darkness, and she never wanted to read it because of the title, Heart of Darkness, and she was just like, "Oh, that sounds evil." And I'm like, "Well, but it's you think it would, but it's about British colonialism in Africa at this time." And she's like, "What?" And then just knowing it's about British colonialism in Africa, it could be like, well, this is just super violent and super, just so dark and all this stuff, and yeah, it is. But then through that comes this just very good story, very good themes, and I guess a moral. It doesn't really seem like he's trying to teach necessarily a moral. He's just, as we'll see, I think Conrad is kind of laying out his experiences and writing that into like, wow, this is just absolutely horrible what went on there. And it's not even just what went on there, but what can go on here and what does go on here in our hearts. Yeah.
Yeah, I see the message more of a warning where he's not telling you how to live your life, but he's exposing just a darkness that he sees. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. You got your reflection questions?
Well, I did want to talk about before we kind of get into that, I noticed there was a lot of religious imagery in Heart of Darkness, which I found really interesting. I don't know if you picked up on that,
A
but
little bit.
the whole thing, they're kind of on a religious pilgrimage to see this Mr. Kurtz, who is, you know, thinking himself like a deity to the natives. And even when Mr. Kurtz has died, Marlowe talks about a veil had been rent, and like that's just like the moment when Jesus died
And he
on the
talks
cross.
about, yeah, well, I think that's the most on the nose one.
Yeah.
But it talks about the spiritual experience that the intended and Marlowe have when, they're like, wow, we had witnessed Mr. Kurtz.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of joked that it almost seems that Marlowe gets like converted to Mr. Kurtz's religion, because even though he's like in one sense repulsed by Mr. Kurtz, he's like he agrees to protect his reputation, and he says himself he's a remarkable man. And so he kind of gets converted to Kurtzianity.
Kurtzianity.
So, I mean, the thing that just occupied most of my thoughts, as the people in this book, was just Mr. Kurtz, like the man. And I don't know, he's got to be one of the most interesting villains I've ever encountered,
Yeah.
because he doesn't do or say very much in the actual story, but just his shadow kind of overcasts the entire
story. Oh, everybody talks about him.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody talks about him, and Marlowe gets this idea in his head about him, and about like all the things that he's done, and everybody kind of reveres him, and then it all builds up until he finally reaches the heart of darkness and sees what Mr. Kurtz has become.
The thing that I felt was so compelling about Mr. Kurtz is that he wasn't just like, oh, I'm just a bad guy who just mistreats, the native people here. But he was so aspirational in his outlook. I mean, you see this at the beginning with the company talking about, oh, the betterment to society and stuff. And that's not really what happens in the Congo. But Mr. Kurtz kind of embodies this so well. He talks about like his remarkable plans, and he's described as a beacon of light and progress, but yet at the same time he's so evil and dark at the same time. And so it's like that aspirational nature where he believes in his mission and he thinks himself like a religious figure, but yet he's so evil at the same time. It's like at one point, at the same time, because of his words, I feel almost drawn in myself to this kind of hopeful, aspirational message. But then it's like the darkness underneath hits you, and it's like, ugh.
Yeah, his words seem very hopeful, and like, wow, he can bring about this change that would be for better. But then we look around at the consequence of everything that he's done, and I think even Kurtz realizes this as he stands on the steamboat as they're leaving and yells out the horror. He realizes, I guess, or is convicted in that moment of all the horror that he has brought upon the Congo.
Mm-hmm. There was some other little moment in the book where, because he does some other talking to the place as they leave on the steamboat, but where he talks about, he just yells out like, I'll wrench your heart out from you yet, where it's almost like, I don't know, I took it as the place almost got the better of him, where he was like, he's trying to kind of on his mission to renew and like reform this place, but the place has the last word. And so I don't know, maybe this can get into my first question because this directly relates to it, but what is the Heart of Darkness? I'll let you say.
I think, well, the Heart of Darkness, at least as what's hinted at in the story, the Heart of Darkness is both talking about, at the beginning of the book when Marlowe is talking about, well, how was it when the Romans came up the River Thames? He's talking about that Heart of Darkness as as we're on the outside of the River Thames, and then we go up into the Heart of Darkness, where all that violence of conquering is happening by the Romans. And then again in the Congo, as he's at the mouth of the river, and then as he's being swallowed, he goes down into the Heart of Darkness, which is where around Mr. Kurtz is, where that's basically the hub of like kind of where all this bad stuff is happening. I guess it's not where like the start of colonialism happened in the Congo, but it's where, like everybody else says, Mr. Kurtz is their best man. He is the best at getting the ivory. He is the best at, spreading this colonialism. And so I think in that case, that would be the Heart of Darkness, as of like that is, Mr. Kurtz is the heart of their mission, basically. And their mission in reality is spreading, this terror upon the Congo, as we see with the emaciated black men who are trying to find shade under the tree that Marlowe sees on his walk right after he lands in the Congo, as we see with the corpse of the general that Marlowe takes his place at the very beginning of the story, when fighting over hens. The general, I guess the captain of the steamboat, was arguing with the leader of a tribesman, and he thought he had
Swedish guy.
Yeah.
And then the other general was a Dane. I was like, is this Beowulf part 2?
Well, he feels like he gets cheated, and he starts to roughing up the chief of the tribe, and the son of the chief goes and stabs him and kills him, the captain of the steamboat, and he dies, and everybody just leaves. Everybody just gets out of there. The Westerners just leave, and the Africans, they just abandon their whole village there. And when Marlowe finally reaches the Congo and sees it, he sees that there's just grass growing through the remains of this captain, and all his stuff is still there. It hasn't been touched. And so there we see, I think, two different hearts of darkness. We see one, the heart of darkness that is colonialism and the terror that is being wrought upon the Congo. And then we see the heart of darkness inside the captain, of his greed and his pride and his condition of feeling like he, because he is, I guess, a Westerner, because he is, I guess some people would argue because he's white. I don't know what the Swedish man is thinking. It could be the case. I mean, there was a sense of like black people are inferior at the time, but I feel like more so it's a case of I'm here to conquer, and so I will put my authority over you.
So, I mean, everything that you're saying makes sense. I guess I'm thinking of, like, there's many areas where we see darkness, but like, what is the heart of darkness? Maybe it's...
Right. That's what I'm getting at. I think the heart of darkness is multiple things. The heart of darkness, in the most general sense, is the most furthest point of the river that Charles Marlowe reaches in the
that's
story.
what I was thinking. Because they're there before, but they still are going towards the heart of darkness.
Right. The heart of darkness, more specifically in the story, is the heart of darkness that led the people to do the violence. Because he even says at the end of the story, how immense is the heart of darkness that's just of the River Thames. Meaning like the heart of darkness that's in London, that allows these people to do violence, that allows these people to do this horror that lies within them, even though latent, they're not the ones going out and doing the colonialism, the military is and all that stuff. But they still have that heart of darkness. The heart of darkness that's up the Congo River, and the heart of darkness that's within themselves. The heart of darkness that's shown itself outside of Mr. Kurtz.
Yeah, because I was thinking, like, for a lot of the book, like, Mr. Kurtz is the heart of darkness, but, I mean, he is very dark, but not really, because in the end, he kind of gets defeated by the heart of darkness, where he kind of really falls to his own evil. And so the heart of darkness is even bigger than Mr. Kurtz. It almost seemed like the place is evil as well. I know this is more about colonialism, but there was so much about the book about the place seems to have an effect on people. Like when you're away from modern society, like people can get away with things. Like there talks about people like, oh, I can just shoot people and there's no like justice system. So I don't know if you'd say a third Heart of Darkness, but it seems like almost the place is very evil in that.
I think there's specifically two Hearts of Darkness, the one up the river in the book and then in people. But I think, I mean, I don't really know if there's a container of how many Hearts of Darkness there can be.
I mean, yeah, I think this has been interesting discussion. I don't know if it's kind of a cop-out to say like, well, let's just add another Heart of Darkness, because I was like, what is the Heart of Darkness?
Yeah.
But
Generally, it's up the Congo, but I think very specifically in the book, it's what's inside people. Yeah, the capability of violence.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the symbolic significance of Mr. Kurtz. I think we kind of already answered it. He, embodies the abuses of colonialism and just the evil, but yet the face of progress.
He also embodies, it's just like the two Hearts of Darkness side of a coin thing of, yes, he embodies the evils of colonialism, but I think it can also be said he embodies the everyday person if they were given too much power, if they were, if they gave in to their Heart of Darkness.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because it almost seems like in this place, Mr. Kurtz, he's in this interstation, he's all the way, down, away from modern life, the things that normally restrain us from our evil desires are totally undone from him, and he's in control of the natives. He's like a deity to them. He, shoots his guns. Those are his like thunder and lightning, and they kind of worship him. And so you kind of see his passion unleashed. So I think it's even bigger in my mind than colonialism for Mr. Kurtz. I mean, he is very much like human nature, almost like pushed to the extent of its potential evil. Oh, well, this wasn't on my list of questions, but just something I thought was super random was the Russian guy. That was the thing, like, I was not expecting that, like, just came out of nowhere. Like, what do you think about him?
He was Mr. Kurtz's #1 fan.
So I almost wondered if, and I could be totally wrong, but if this Russian guy was almost like Joseph Conrad writing himself into the story, or at least a version of himself, because the Russian man's life on one hand parallels Joseph's life in several ways. Like, although Joseph, he was originally from Poland, he was in Russia for a long time, and then he went to school in Europe, and he eventually goes away from school, and so he's very similar to the Russian in a way. But also I think the Russian he's dressed in these colorful clothes, and in the book it calls him a Harley Quinn. Well, it just, I was looking that up, and it comes from like a character from like an Italian theater and stuff.
Oh.
So very obscure, but I think I was looking it up, and the character Harley Quinn, like with Batman and stuff, like the name is based off of that, like this clownish character from Italian theater. So very, very obscure reference. I was like, this is Harley Quinn.
Yeah. I'll make the case that Marlowe is Conrad.
See, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, but it could be the whole two Hearts of Darkness things where he's exploring more of his own thoughts and self-understanding.
Yeah.
And the guy, I don't know if it's kind of like, if he's potentially like homosexual, the Russian guy, because there's one point where he talks about, like Mr. Kurtz, he would talk to me about love sometimes. And then he'd be like, no, it's not like that. It's not like that. And then there's at one point where Joseph describes him as he looked extremely gay in the sunlight. But I know it's like, okay, gay didn't mean that back then, but just the pairing of those two things. It's like, in my mind, I just had like gay Russian Harley Quinn.
Like extremely.
I know, but it's supposed to be a dark story. So
Yeah.
So that, but I
It's
just,
serious.
yeah, serious.
He's seriously a gay Russian Harley Quinn.
But I do like that, where you just insert just this random character that you weren't expecting. It reminds me of another like sci-fi book that I will not say, where it's like all of a sudden there's a dwarf speaking in riddles that comes out of nowhere. But
What?
if you know, you know. Maybe in the future we'll do that book.
What
But
the?
I'm not going to spoil. But just like something random like that.
Yeah.
All right. We talked about the religious symbolism. How about this one? To what extent do you agree or disagree with the message of the book? Do you think his portrayal is accurate or good? Do you think it's helpful?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of anti-war novels out there, and I would categorize this as an anti-war novel. It's more so other things, but it is kind of specifically anti-war, or I guess anti-exploitation in war.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think even though, okay, there's a lot of anti-war novels out there, I think this one stands out very pointedly as a little bit more than just that. And I would agree with the message that it gives of, he says heart of darkness, and so I'm assuming he means that's bad, the heart of darkness that's in us. And even he is frightened and disgusted by it. So yes, I would agree with the message that, the terrible things that have been done in the Congo, the terrible things that have been done in up the River Thames in London when the Romans were there, the terrible things that Mr. Kurtz did are terrible things, and they are the heart of darkness or the condition of sinfulness that are within us.
Yeah. I agree with the message that I think he's trying to portray from the book. I think, I don't know, some of the time when I was reading it, I didn't like it in the beginning because I don't like dark stories, but also it almost seemed like the author was trying to like really bring out my emotions in a way that was like very visceral, that made me think, is this really that, would it really have been that bad, or is it really like this? For example, with the accountant, like he almost seems like absurdly evil in a way that wouldn't make sense. At least where it's like, okay, the people are dying like just down the hill from like the accountant's building. But then when he gets up there, he's all dressed in fine clothes and all starched up, and his hair's all nice. And then he complains about the sick person who has to stay with him, where it's like, I can't do my work over the sound of, like, it's almost like, dude, like, how could you have like no like
I can see that being the case. I mean, being disconnected from reality when so much horror is going on around you, I can see someone becoming disconnected. Yeah.
I guess it just seemed like Joseph like he seems like he's really trying to play with my emotions, or he's really trying to make me feel angry. And so I guess I just don't like where it's like, it feels like the author is trying to manipulate my emotions, but you're always doing that to some extent. Like with a good story, you want people to feel things, but there was that sense of, could it really have been that dark? Can the accountant really be that detached and hypocritical? But yeah, I think the message is really good, and in one sense, it's exposing colonialism and this just great hypocrisy of like, we think we're doing good, but it's actually evil. But it also, like, it's a message for the individual as well as society, and so I think both of those things are important. You got any other thoughts?
Mm-mm.
Okay, well, I have thoroughly enjoyed this book. Enjoyed Mr. Kurtz, both enjoyed and hated him.
It's a super good book.
It's a good book. I know it's going to use some interesting terms,
We highly suggest anyone who listens to this podcast to read the books that we share. I mean, sure, we gave a summary of what happened, and sure, the ending is spoiled, but I mean, Joseph Conrad writes in such a rich way that could not be captured in I guess it was 35-minute long summary. And also, you may discover new things that we didn't even discover in our read through of the book. But yeah, the book does use a lot of the N-word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was getting
Yep.
at.
Yep. And I mean, there was the author who wrote, I think it was the author who wrote Things Fall Apart, who is an African author. He has come out or I guess he did in the past, criticized Joseph Conrad for his racist depictions of African people, which, okay, dude, I can see that. I can see that.
Okay, dude.
Yeah, I can see that, but I mean, come on. Joseph Conrad wrote this book in, what, 1890?
1899.
Yeah, that was what he grew. Also, that's ironic. 1899 is what Red Dead Redemption 2 is set in.
Oh.
But anyway, that's what he grew up in. That's what he grew up in, and he spent time in the Congo at that time.
Yeah.
And saw all those horrors. And so for him to use that language in the book, that's just kind of what the reality was. And so it's not racist of him to, put that in there. He's telling you what happened, and he's using the language of the time and of that place, like of what the colonialists would probably use. But yeah.
Yeah, so I agree. I mean, it's a wonderful book, but if you're reading, just keep that in mind. Just be ready for it. So
Yeah. We can get into the history now, a little more in depth. Yeah.
Okay.
So we already went ahead and did a little bit of the background, but in my research, I discovered something. I mean, that may even more just open up the story to you and be like, oh, okay, I can see now, why he wrote this, the language that he uses, and how descriptive he can be in the story. So we already know Joseph Conrad was born Joseph Theodor Konrad Korzeniowski in 1857 in Poland, and in this time Poland was under Russian rule. So he wrote in the Russian guy. That could be why. His father, Apollo, was a poet and a painter who was exiled for political activism. His mother died of tuberculosis when Conrad was 7 years old. His father died of tuberculosis when Conrad was 11 years old. 7-11. Raised by his uncle, Tadeusz, it's some weird Polish name, Tadeusz Bobrowski.
Yes.
Tadeusz Bobrowski. I'm probably butchering his name, but it sounds funny to say it that way. Yeah. He provided emotional and financial support for Conrad on his way up into adulthood. He grew up reading widely Scott, Dickens, Charles Dickens, Victor Hugo, etc. He had a very early exposure to literature. At 16, he left for Marseille to pursue his dream of becoming a sailor. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
Early voyages, it was with the French merchant marine, even rumored to have taken part in gun running, which is interesting. He struggled with debt and depression. He attempted suicide in his 20s. He switched to the British Merchant Navy in 1878, beginning a 16-year maritime career. He's living the dream, I guess his dream. He became a British citizen in 1886, hence why he is known as a British novelist, and earned his Master Mariner's certificate. His voyages gave him first-hand experience of Asia, Africa, and South America, settings and material that shaped almost all of his fiction. His childhood dream, and this is so on the nose, his childhood dream, he pointed at a map right on Africa, and he vowed to go there.
Mm-hmm.
Charles Marlowe literally did the same thing.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. In 1890, he finally secured a position as a steamboat captain on the Congo River. There he witnessed atrocities under Leopold II's brutal regime, mass exploitation, starvation, cruelty. He witnessed the Heart of Darkness. The experience was very traumatic for him, leaving him with lifelong health problems and disillusionment. I can see why. This experience directly inspired Heart of Darkness, no duh, his most famous story, the title of which signifies not only the heart of Africa, the Dark Continent, but also the heart of evil, everything that is corrupt, nihilistic, or malign, and perhaps the heart of man. In a real sense, the dying Kurtz crying, the horror, was actually Conrad's, as he witnessed all that he did in the Congo.
All that he did? Or so is he Mr. Kurtz then?
all that he saw, not did, saw. Yeah. He retired from sea by 1894 and began writing seriously. His first novel was Almayer's Folly, which was set in the Malaysian archipelago. Other major works include, like I said earlier, Lord Jim, Nostromo, The Secret Sharer, Under Western Eyes, and Chance and Victory. He is known for modernist techniques, frame narratives, unreliable narrators, psychological depth, which, I mean, we can see all that in The Heart of Darkness. He married Jessie George. She has two manly names. He married her in 1895. Yeah. He married her in 1895, and they had two sons. He, again, struggled with poor health, debt, and depression for much of his life. They lived mostly in southeast England, and Conrad was actually offered a knighthood in 1924, but refused. And I can see why. I mean, he went to the Congo under British rule and saw all that they were doing to these people in the Congo. And then, later in his life, they're trying to knight him. I can see why he doesn't want to have anything to do with anything of the British regime. Well, in 1924, when he was offered knighthood, he died later that year in 1966. He's considered one of the greatest English novelists. Despite English being his third language, he had a huge influence on later writers like T.S. Eliot, William Faulkner, Graham Greene, and George Orwell, all very famous, except Graham Greene. I don't really know what Graham Greene wrote.
I just think it's interesting with George Orwell because I was thinking of 1984, just with the part at the end where Marlowe seems to almost like join Mr. Kurtz, or he almost is converted to his religion. And at the end of 1984, the main character, he joins Big Brother and he's kind of goes over to the other side.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if that's because of Heart of Darkness, but I was thinking of 1984 when I was reading that.
Yeah. Conrad was criticized. Oh, wait. I wrote it in here. Criticized in the 20th century by post-colonial writers like Chinua Achebe for racist depictions of Africa and Africans. Bruh. Anyway, maybe it is racist, but he's just saying it like he saw it. And he says that's bad. So I don't know how you can call him racist for saying what was being done to the African Americans is bad. Anyway.
Yeah. I definitely enjoyed the story even more after looking into Joseph Conrad's life, because it seems even much more than just a story that just someone made up. Like, it parallels so much of his own life. And so I think not only is he like an authoritative source to really be able to paint a good picture of what things were like, but it just makes the whole story just feel more real. So
yeah, I really liked the book.
I did want to say, because I mean, there's a lot about the evils of colonialism, and there's the juxtaposition of like high and lofty ideas with evil abuses and disregard of human life. I did want to say that what I wouldn't want to take from this story is just to kind of say that like all like lofty ideals are bad, but more of just like that was completely hypocritical, because it does almost seem like a twisting of the gospel of Christianity. And so I wouldn't want someone to come away with it being like all of those ideals are kind of nonsense, because in Christianity there is a Messiah, there is a kingdom, there is someone who talked about, peace on earth, justice to the nations, someone who was going to defeat sin and death and going to wipe away every stain of sin on the world. And so Mr. Kurtz, he is really a lot like a false Christ, but there is a true Christ. There is someone who is good and not evil, someone who is very God himself, who came to this world and who's going to completely wipe away all the darkness. And so I just think that's important as well, where it's like this is a twisting of everything that's good and the gospel on its head. But there is a true gospel. There is a kingdom of light. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, the Christian, continuation of Heart of Darkness would be, Conrad, and I'll just say Conrad because Charles Marlowe is basically just Conrad, and the story is just his experiences. Conrad's disillusionment after he comes home, the Christian continuation would be he sees all this evil, and so if evil, then good, right? And so if there is good, what is that good?
Mm-hmm.
And if that good's coming from us, then of course that's not good at all. It's ultimately meaningless.
Mm.
And so if good, then God, meaning that if there is good, then there has to be, something that's saying this is good and this is bad. And that has to be outside of ourselves if it's going to actually objectively be good. And so then he would come to a conclusion of what I saw in the Congo points to, hey, I recognize this is evil, and I recognize this is evil because I know there's good, and I know there's good because there's a God, and that God is, Christ. And so then what he would see in the Congo would eventually lead him to Christ, and his disillusionment would then become a dependency on Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's with Mr. Kurtz, he's very much a reversal of Christ, but with Christ, he dies for your sins and he comes back to life on the third day. But with Mr. Kurtz, you kind of die for him and so he can get more ivory. So yeah, so the two, there's parallels, but then also very big differences. But you're totally right, where it's like you wouldn't have any objective standard. Like you couldn't say like that's evil without some kind of objective standard, and so you'd have to believe in the good as well. And so you can't just be like, oh, it's just all meaningless.
We all know that it's evil, but then you have to ask your question, well, how do you know that's evil? And then you could say, well, because I just feel that it's evil and it's, killing. Of course that's evil. Well, of course that's evil. I agree. But how do you know that's objectively evil? And so, yeah, this isn't a apologetic or philosophical, conversation now, but it's just interesting.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that there is hope.
Yeah.
As dark as this book is, don't let it make you become skeptical of the light.
Right. And the Christian readers, don't be so, it's hard to word it in the right way. Don't be so like, I can only intake things of light. I can only intake things that are happy and good, stuff like that. That's okay. If that is you.
Are you saying that's me? Because I like uplifting stuff.
No. I'm saying if you cannot handle stuff that's a little darker and heavier, then of course don't subject yourself to that. And we're not saying that. But if you think you can, it is good to read this stuff sometimes. Just like in Heart of Darkness. Yeah, Heart of Darkness is very dark and it's very heavy. But just like how we've both just now said, it helps point even more to, this is Joseph Conrad's experiences on the Congo. It helps point even more to, wow, that's so much evil. Thank goodness that there is a God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it gives context to the light. And so you can't really understand the light without really understand that there is actually real evil in the world. And I'm just thinking about my own faith and Christianity, how I was just studying Mark recently, and that scene where Jesus is at the cross and this Roman centurion, like after Jesus dies, says, "Surely this was the Son of God." It's like that just dark moment where there's literally darkness over the whole land for a certain period of time. Like that felt like similar to Heart of Darkness in a way, where it's like it's under this veil of darkness that you see the light of Christ shine.
Yeah.
You need to be able to look at the darkness to be able to see the light and understand what Christ has done. So
Yeah. Well, I think we could wrap it up.
yeah, I think so too. I really enjoyed this conversation. I've enjoyed the book and excited for what's to come next.
Yeah. And next week, we're excited. We will have a guest, and we're going to be talking about Henry Glassey's Irish Folktales. Where it's just going to be fun time. There's not going to be any summaries or stuff. I do need to look up the copyright of Irish Folktales to see if we can read straight out of the book, because I would like to do that.
Yeah, it's hard to do a summary of like already short stories.
Yeah, they're like one-page stories. They're really funny. And so we'll have a guest along for that and just share those stories with him. But yeah, thank you for joining us in the Fairy Tavern.
Yeah, it's wonderful weather outside.
It is. It is 2:29 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. It's like 60. It's around 63 degrees outside right now and sunny.
Well, I don't know. Time is kind of relative in the Fairy Tavern because
it is not 2:29 p.m. right now, but it is 63 degrees outside and sunny. Yes.
But yeah. Anyways, hope you've enjoyed it, and just hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and that maybe some of you will read this book. So yeah. Bye.
Bye.